in our website later on. I don't know where Destination Home is at the moment, but we welcome them.
I told them that they could come a little later.
Okay.
Yeah.
They will be here tonight to give us a little input on their plans to address the homelessness situation. And thank you, Matt, for being here tonight. Really appreciate you from District 10 being here. I've been to a couple meetings with you so far, and I appreciate your attention to detail. So as you know, the meeting's being recorded, and I'd like to give a short update from LPNA board and volunteers. And what I'll do is I'll share my screen and show you a couple things that we've been doing in our neighborhood here. Let me share my screen. Oops, starting at the wrong one, but that's okay. Okay. So first, welcome you all to this quarterly meeting. And one thing I wanted to mention to all the people here, and you can spread the word around the neighborhood, is that we placed a bulletin board onto our restroom building in the Los Paseos Park recently. It's got a lot of information in it right now that Karen puts in there. We will be updating that quite often. That particular bulletin board was done as a joint venture with a Boy Scout in our neighborhood named Sean Tran. He lives in our neighborhood there. He helped with the building of the bulletin board, and he actually orchestrated it, and with good inputs from the city and the parks department and his scout leaders. He got an Eagle badge by doing this, and he'll be celebrating that at an award ceremony coming up here pretty soon. So Karen has the key to that, and we'll be updating it routinely.
Should we offer a way for them, people to post stuff? Like, you know, you can send it to vp@lospaseo.neighbors.com, and if you have something of interest to the community to post, but not advertising, right? We're not going to do advertising.
Yes.
At this point. Yeah.
That's what we'll be allowed to do. Let me admit Jeff Wagner. Karen, can you admit Jeff Wagner?
I did.
Thank you. Okay. So other than the bulletin board, a couple other projects that we've done in the bulletin board. What's going on with my computer? I'm stopping sharing. Share my screen again. We will be having a I am very sorry, people. I've had this horrible problem here today with this, my PowerPoint. Can you see that?
Yes.
LPNA Summer in the Park. Next
Yes.
Thursday, we'll have some fun time in the park here with grilled hot dogs, and Herb Bowen giving his great hot dog grilling techniques, put them to use, and potato salad, and come on out and meet your neighbors. At each picnic that we have in barbecue, we'll have a table, and there will be a table for emergency preparedness with a drawing for a packet of emergency supplies given away. Barbara, Herb, and Wyman and others in our neighborhood are prepared to communicate with each other using walkie-talkies in a time of emergency, even with the cell towers being down. So come to the next picnic and learn more about this. We've got walkie-talkies spread throughout the neighborhood, and we can communicate with each other with these walkie-talkies. So we'll be able to, we're trying to develop this throughout San Jose also. So it's something that originated here, and we're continuing on with it. So come to see our barbecue and learn a little bit more. The next slide is going to show, if I get to it, our National Night Out again this year, August 2nd. We had one last year, about 300 people showed up, and we're planning to do a little bit more this year, we believe. We're going to have the Crimson Blues Band show up. Excuse me, folks. They're a great band that has always had a lot of support and favor at our National Night Out. Brian the Bubble Guy will be around. We'll have some games. San Jose Police will visit, and we'll have a scout ceremony again, and free ice cream and pizza this year. No hot dogs this year, but pizza from a local restaurant that we all know around here.
Five star, right?
My
Is that what it?
five-star pizza.
Yeah.
They're going to be providing us with the pizzas. So we'll have a warming bin for the pizzas, and come on out and have fun and spread the word for August 2nd. One other thing I'd like to update is some of the projects we're working on in the Los Paseos area is signposts for the Paseo number 2 courts. 8 courts have been had their signposts made, and I've got 3 of them painted so far. And on the right of this picture, you can see an example of what it would look like at the Paseos. All those little brackets, the black brackets you've seen as you walk the Paseo number 2, they'll eventually be filled up with street names pretty soon. This fair was done with help from Santa Clara High School through a program on the ShopBot that uses a 90-degree drill bit and zooms around and creates the names with the proper depth and so forth. So that's already been done with these 4x4 Conhart redwood posts. They've been varnished and will last a long time out there.
They look great, Greg.
Yeah, I think they look pretty nice. Every time I talk to somebody about the signposts in the Paseos, they really do appreciate them. And I think that's the update from the Los Paseos side, unless Barbara, Karen want to add anything. Otherwise, we can get some update from Matt.
For the D10 office,
For the D10 office.
Matthew? Oh, there he is.
There we go. Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. So great. Can I share my screen?
Yes, I made you co-host if you.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, it's working. Let me pull up the screen. But
Greg, you might have to stop sharing. You're still sharing yours.
Thank you, Karen.
it might let me override his. I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
the page that I had, my slide deck unfortunately went out. I'm trying to figure out why, but I'm going to share the latest newsletter from Matt in our office. So can you all see this?
Yes.
Perfect. So if you have not already, I highly recommend that all of you go now to our website, which I'm going to drop in the chat box, sjd10.com. That is our council page that we have a lot of great information and background information about Matt, about our office, our contact information. You have the ability to contact us through our ticketing system. I know some of you have gone through that. And then also profiles on all of us and Matt's positions. So please go there. But the most important thing is when you go to that website, there's a blue button on the top. Please click on that and sign up for our newsletter. We send out a bi-weekly newsletter and it has a lot of great information. Matt personally writes the what we call the newsletter letter, which contains great information about upcoming events and actions that the city council will be taking. He also does a quick debrief of council meetings, updates of community events, and then we also have our community corner and other great items. So I'm just going to quickly go through this since my slide deck's not opening up here. But we're really excited. The 4th of July fireworks have returned to Almaden Lake Park. We know over the past 2 years during the COVID pandemic, there were illegal fireworks upticked significantly. Legal shows like this are proven to reduce the amount of illegal activity out there, helping support our police officers who are already stretched thin, working on a day that many officers typically want the day off for. And so that is one way in which we're trying to combat illegal fireworks from happening in the community. So highly recommend, if you go to our website, you can check out the information. The 4th of July, we will be at Almaden Lake Park with about 20,000 of our closest friends, and we'll have a fireworks show that starts at about 9 p.m. Big community festival and other opportunities there. Some great news from the budget. For the first time in 20 years, your city government's Titan Belt was able to achieve a budget surplus for the next projected 5 years. That is an incredible action that we've been able to pull that off. And we're glad to see that, despite the rumors of a potential recession before us, your city hall is looking fiscally sound for the next 5 years. It's going to be up to all of us, the residents, the neighborhood associations, working with the council to ensure it stays that way, and that we're able to both bring in more staff and hire for the positions that we need while keeping our budget sound. It was a $1.5 billion annual general fund budget that was approved at council on Tuesday. And just some items I wanted to show that are of interest. Despite us having a sound budget, we still have a very small city hall. And this city hall is smaller than what we had back in 2001. You could see in the chart below, we have climbed up significantly from the dip in 2011 of just 5,427 employees. That includes your police officers, your firefighters, but also your parks and rec staff, your public works staff, your transportation and road improvement staff. So we're on our way back up, but making sure we're making fiscally sound decisions at City Hall are going to be ever more important as we move forward into the next decade. We do have issues I want to point out that Matt points out in his email. I know a lot of us are concerned about public safety. Matt is very much concerned about this. It's one of his top issues. But San Jose employs just 11 officers per 10,000 residents. Compare that to most large cities in the United States, where we have about 20 to 50 officers per 10,000. Cities like San Francisco and Oakland have these numbers, despite being smaller cities than San Jose. A lot of reasons for that. I won't get into it because we'll be here all night. But please keep paying attention to our newsletters. Matt does tend to explain that. And we have a Medium post, which I'll share some links to, that further explain that, why that has happened. And so just a real quick recap, also some budget requests that we were able to secure additional dollars for. We've seen some upticks in crime in our commercial districts as residents more and more have been working from home throughout the valley. We've seen commercial crimes, burglaries, break-ins occurring more frequently. We were able to secure some funding to pilot a capture crime program where we partner with small businesses to help them purchase cameras, which are known to deter crime by up to 20%, and also help with follow-up investigations should those be needed. We also secured some dollars to help bring back the 4th of July fireworks. Great way to bring community together, but also combat illegal fireworks. This is an interesting one that I'm going to highlight for you all right now, is the bot stops. We have sideshow problems, donuts, speeding, street racing throughout District 10. District 10 was largely developed between the 50s and the 90s, correct? And these are when the streets were made very wide, the intersections very broad, and people can kind of take advantage of that and speed down our roadways. Santa Teresa is a very big hotspot. These bot stops are little, think of those little separators on the road that you can drive over. You don't want to do a donut over a collection of these that are on the road. You can drive over it safely, but if you try to do a donut, it's not going to, it could do some damage to your car if you try to do that. And other types of illegal activities, it makes it very uncomfortable for them. So this has been proven in Oakland and other cities to be effective in combating sideshows. So another way in which we're complementing the police department and trying to fight these types of crimes from occurring on the road. So we want to get one in the Santa Teresa area. Help us identify the best hotspots. So please email us. We'll be doing some community meetings in the near future to identify sites along with DOT data to pick the best 3. We did invest some dollars into our community urban canopy. San Jose has largely seen a decrease in the amount of trees, and trees are not only good for the air we breathe and for kind of the visual appeal of them, but they're good for actually lowering the temperatures of our neighborhoods and good for other things. So we've invested some dollars where we'll be able to help neighborhood associations secure funding, such as Los Paseos, for tree plantings in their community. So we'd love to partner up on that. This one's close to home for all of you, up on Burnell Way. We know this has been kind of an area of concern where there's a wall that is near the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. We know that there was a little bit more funding that was needed to secure a certain height. Would love to put together a community meeting with the neighborhood association here to help design that wall and figure out a good route in which we can take with the Department of Transportation in rebuilding that sound wall. But I know there's been an issue of people kind of taking the shortcut route. A long-term vision, if this is what you'd like to proceed, move forward with, maybe we can pursue funding that would bring an actual pedestrian bridge over that track. Maybe if that's something that the neighborhood would like in the long term, but in the short term, securing that wall and making sure it prevents people from being able to jump over, putting themselves in danger and others in danger as well as they cross those tracks at the railroads. And then finally, we were able to secure some funding for animal shelters. You wouldn't think it, but our shelters, San Jose provides animal care shelter for cities throughout Silicon Valley. They do, of course, pay for that service, but for quite some time, they haven't been getting the investment they need to properly serve our communities. So we were able to secure some dollars to help with staff recruitment and retention and investments in the facility, which itself is aging pretty quickly here. So yeah, so that is the quick debrief of the budget. 4th of July, I encourage all of you also to stop on by our YouTube page and check out Inside City Hall, where Matt interviews members of City Hall staff to discuss things in depth. We had Jim Shannon with us about a week ago, where he dived deeply into the budget, and Matt was able to talk to him. We had some residents join us for that meeting. Please take a moment to stop by and take a look at that. And then we also have our council preview and upcoming events in our newsletter. So highly recommend it. Hope you all can swing by there and sign up for that now. I'll make sure to add a couple more links so that you could contact me personally. But great, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. If not, looking forward to tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Matthew. If there's any questions that anybody would like to ask now, please go ahead.
You can either click the raise hand or raise your hand via your camera, or just take yourself off mute and type in.
Matt, you can stop sharing your screen at any time.
Great. Okay. I am going to put my email and I put my cell phone number, which Greg has as well. If you ever need to reach me, feel free to shoot me a text message. Text usually helps out because I can clear through things pretty quickly. If you need help with any type of city service, please don't be afraid to reach out. I'm here for you 7 days a week.
I see Mary Patterson has her hand up. Hi, Mary. Oh, you're on mute, Mary. You're still on mute.
Barbara said some people cannot unmute.
Oh, let me see. Okay, try it now. Oh, that's weird. Greg, do you have some setting that is not allowing? There we go.
I don't know how you did it, but anyway, hi
Yay.
neighbors, hi everyone, Karen,
Hi.
Greg,
Hello.
Mary, Matthew. Thank you for the update, Matthew. Just 3 things quickly. 1, trees, yes, we don't have enough. 2, Bernal Way overpass for pedestrians would be outstanding. You know, right now, the Coyote Creek Trail, although so close to us, is really inaccessible. If I bike, I've got a billion overpasses and 101 off ramps and on ramps and 85 off ramps and on ramps to get to Coyote Creek Trail. And who wants to drive? It's literally 500 feet away.
Right.
So anyway, I love the idea of a pedestrian overpass. Been dreaming about that for 20 years. So thank you so much for the information. I think this is a great neighborhood association to partner with on all of these things. So really appreciate it. We love bots, dots. They are safe for motorcycles.
We want more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Put them everywhere.
yeah. Cool. And thank you so much for that, Mary. Yeah, we're happy to partner. We council members always willing to put together a community meeting to discuss ideas in which we can try to find funding for projects that we don't have available to the community just yet. So feel free to reach out and make a request, and we're happy to look into it. Something I failed to mention, I'm so sorry. This coming Wednesday, the 22nd, we do have scheduled a meeting at the Santa Teresa Library and via Zoom. It was in the newsletter as well, about the safe parking, the proposed safe parking site at the Santa Teresa VTA station. We did have a couple neighborhood leaders join us a couple weeks back of that site. We wanted to do a larger community meeting, which is why we made it a Zoom meeting and an in-person meeting so that, you know, everybody's welcome to attend. We have San Jose Police Department, Beautify SJ, Life Moves, Homeless Concerns, the Housing Department, and our council office will be there. So looking forward to that meeting next Wednesday at 7 p.m. And we'll be sure to continue. Please help us get the information out to your neighbors so that we can ensure a good attendance. Karen, do you have a question?
I do. Yeah, I do. I kind of slightly related because in that same memorandum, it was called to my attention that they are now reactivating a site for the EIH housing at 85 and Great Oaks. And it's just such a weird site. I just don't get it. I mean, I'm usually pretty open to I'm pretty open. And I'm looking at that site. I'm like, how on earth would they put 100 people on this narrow strip? You guys, so it's on the on-ramp. If you get on the freeway, which I do, I get on the freeway at Great Oaks. That's my entrance to 85. It's a very long, narrow strip that abuts the data center there. And I'm just not getting it. You know, there's so many other sites right in the same area. There's the site across the street behind Monterey Grove Apartments, right at the corner of Bernal and 101. I'm pretty sure that's Caltrans. And then there's this big, huge piece of land between all the freeway interchanges. It's got these trees planted in it, like they kind of make an X or a cross. And I'm not getting this narrow piece of land. So do you have any input on that?
Yeah, so the council approved action last year in which they decided that districts that do not have EIH sites will need to get at least one or two sites. And it's a district by district decision. And so they are looking into that site as a part of a larger that larger action. Matt is he is also confused about that site. He's been looking into the Almaden light rail station, if you're familiar with that. Basically where the spur terminus is that goes towards Almaden Lake Park. We've been looking at, there's a parking lot that's vacant and just there's nothing there anymore. There's water district land to the west of it. There's the old light rail station to the north of it. It is a great location. We're asking staff to look into that immediately. But yeah, we have been asking staff to find other locations, knowing that this spot has been kind of a focus for a number of different EIH sites, and we're trying to spread out the areas in which we're adopting these sites. So I know council will be discussing it next Tuesday. I do have a meeting with mayor's team tomorrow to discuss that Great Oak site. I'm happy to follow up with Greg and others, and you, Karen, to let you know how those conversations go. But council will be kind of recommending as a part of that decision made last year and Mayor Liccardo's motion to have 1,000 EIH units built by the end of the year. And so,
So I think technically what you're saying is that this would be the District 10, this would be the District 10 contribution to the EIH infrastructure,
correct.
but it's so close to all the District 2 EIHs, and it's just such a weird site.
Right. We had previously been working before the redistricting took place, we were working on a site at Branham and Monterey, and we were actually making some pretty good ground because it's a site that's been frequently an encampment for, I mean, it's been abated, and homeless individuals have returned there to where we kind of worked with a couple stakeholders and a couple partners. That was a site we were working on. The Great Oak site, it's new to us. We're trying to learn about it ourselves right now. But we are also trying to focus on the Almaden Light Rail Station. There's also a proposal where that little sliver of land that also has an encampment on it right now at 85 and 87 entrance at Santa Teresa. That one would be a little harder to make work because it's a thinner, hillier type of plot of land. But considering the amount of vacant lands, it's just this pocket does have many different open pockets. Somebody just scored, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we will keep the neighborhood updated on that one, and definitely please show up next Tuesday to council to on that site. I mean, on item was it 3.3, I think. I'll make sure to look it up during the meeting and share that link. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
We'll keep our neighborhood up to date on that.
I think I see Gina has her hand up. Take yourself up, or here, try to unmute yourself. Greg, what did you do to fix Mary? Because I asked her to unmute. There we go.
I did nothing. People are
Okay.
unmuting.
There we go.
Yeah, so along those same lines, the existing transitional that is right in that same area, is that not part of the new District 10?
No, it was carved out in the redistricting, so it's a part of the old District 2. I mean, so now District 2 retained those two sites, and we basically lost the one site we were working on.
Mhm.
And so, yeah.
So we move into District 10, but all of the transitional housing that we're living next door to doesn't, so we have to pay again. So it just doesn't seem right. It's way too much density.
Like I said, Matt is very much looking into that light rail station to split it up, and
Yeah.
definitely we hear that clearly.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I don't see Greg. He may have taken a little break or something, but I think if there's no other questions, I think next on the agenda is David Lowe from Destination Home. Oh, Greg, is David in Destination Home next? I don't have the agenda up and you're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thanks, Karen. I've just made David co-host, so he can share a screen, and he is next on the agenda. Thank you, Matt, for your updates. Really appreciate it. And the newsletters are great. I've read them all. I suggest everybody get on that newsletter.
They are well done, and I particularly appreciate the preview to the council meetings, because you rarely get advance notice unless you are really paying attention of important city council things going on. So I was like, wow, that's new, and I appreciated that. So we're gonna move on to David Lowe, Destination Home, and with all the talk of homelessness and affordable housing, and there's just been so much talk of the 5-year plan to end homelessness, and just what is San Jose doing? Destination Home is very involved in what San Jose and I believe Santa Clara County is doing to solve homelessness, especially on the affordable housing front. So we're going to hand it over to David, and he's going to just tell us kind of what they do and what the state of affordable housing is from their perspective.
Thanks, Karen. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. As Karen mentioned, I'm David Lowe. I work with Destination Home, which is a nonprofit working to end homelessness in Santa Clara County. We're kind of a unique organization in that we're not a direct service provider like Life Moves or Home First, who run some of these shelters or affordable housing. We were really formed about a decade ago out of a Blue Ribbon Commission that said we need some organizations that are helping convene everybody, getting the county and the city to talk together, nonprofits all rowing in the same direction. And so we kind of play in that convening role. We also help raise a lot of private funding that we can put towards solutions, as well as try and incubate new programs and advocate for policies. So we're often at these city council meetings, et cetera. And so what I thought I would do today when Karen was telling me a little bit about this is we have a presentation we usually do that kind of gives an overview of where we are with homelessness, kind of the level of the crisis, some of the features we see playing into it, and then what we're doing about it. And so I figured I'd spend, it's just about a 20-minute presentation to kind of go through with it. I'm going to try to go through pretty quickly because I really want to hear your guys' question. I know you have a lot of questions. I'm happy to do my best to answer them. If you have questions along the way, why don't you go and throw them in the chat as we go? I'll take a couple pauses. So as you guys have questions about things that come up, we can kind of answer them, and then we'll just leave more time at the end to talk about it. And the last thing I'll mention is that, I know a lot of the questions I've heard are around the city. I actually, before I came here, I spent about a decade working at City Hall with both Mayor Liccardo and Mayor Reed on their team. So to the extent you have questions about San Jose, I probably have some historical knowledge we can answer too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You guys see this presentation with the green background on it? Great. Yeah. So we call this the Understanding Homelessness presentation, and we'll be talking about it because this is a really complex issue, right? There's a lot of nuances here, a lot of misperceptions, a lot of right perceptions, but we try to give an overview of really what the crisis we're facing in Santa Clara County and how we believe we can get out of it. And when we start, we really like to kind of have this slide. It's actually something I put together by my colleague Bob, who's no longer with us, but it's really an acknowledgement on the left, the idea that we're facing a big crisis, and it really can feel overwhelming. I mean, the number of community groups I've talked to, both with my city hat on or a Destination Home, just says, we see it on our streets, we see the people suffering, we see all the impacts that come from it, and it's very easy to kind of say, throw our hands up, what can we do? But I think what we have seen when we look at other communities, and I think hopefully you guys will agree as we go through this presentation, that we can solve it if we figure out the housing part. Because the housing and connecting a person to housing not only ends homelessness for that person, but we've seen that when we do it at scale, you can actually move the needle in a given community. And unfortunately, we have a long way to go to move that needle here. These are numbers countywide about how many homeless individuals we see on the streets. This is from the 2019 point in time count. And we saw about 10,000 people in Santa Clara County experiencing homelessness on any given night. And the thing that's really characterized by here in Santa Clara County, a lot of the California cities, the vast majority of them are unsheltered, meaning they're living, on our streets, under our bridges, under the freeways, creeks, etc. You may have seen the news. We had some preliminary numbers come out for 2022. We haven't updated this yet because we're waiting for the final report in the month or so. But really what we saw is the numbers stayed relatively flat. Countywide, we're still around 10,000. In San Jose, it jumped a little bit. I think we're up 10% of their 500 or so people. But relatively flat. We still have a big way to go, but some of you remember 3 years ago when we released these numbers, it was like a 30 and 40% jump. The other thing I'd like to remind people, and it's important to know, is homelessness is throughout our community. I think it's a pretty natural instinct for all of us to kind of think about what's close to us, what's in our neighborhood, what do we see when we're driving on our roads, what's our family experiencing. But the unfortunate truth is that neighborhoods throughout the community are dealing with the impacts of homelessness, and people who live throughout the community are dealing with this. So you see San Jose has the lion's share, as it has the lion's share of our population, but no community here is without it. And I think when you start looking at neighborhood by neighborhood, we're all seeing the suffering in a lot of different ways. This is some other stats also from the PIT count. In addition to counting people, we get like some demographic data, which is always really helpful. And I think the main takeaway I always think whenever I look at this data is that our homeless population is as diverse as our broader community. We see people of all ages, all races, all backgrounds amongst those 10,000 folks in who are suffering homelessness. And I think those first couple stats are pretty interesting too, because I think this gets to some of the misperceptions and myths we often hear about people not wanting to come to housing, people who were homeless and moved here because of the services. And there are certainly case by cases of that, but some of these numbers show, right? The majority of people, there are neighbors, there are people who would love to be in housing if they could find something they could afford. And certainly the third one in there too, that there's a variety of reasons people fall into homelessness, not just things we hear about mental health or substance abuse that play into it, but evictions, job losses, families falling apart, all can lead to homelessness. And certainly at the bottom, I think the part that at least pulls on my heartstrings a lot too is this idea that, unfortunately, we have a lot of kids coming out of the foster care system, and families who are also in this horrible situation. And, we helped to launch a campaign specifically focused on families last year that we're really trying to hope that with that subpopulation, we can make some progress as well. The other thing that we have really started to try to understand a little bit more, it's worth pointing out, is just that there are also deep racial disparities when we look at who's homeless in our community. If you look, these stats kind of show when we look at different demographics, people of color, what proportion they make of our overall community, as well as where they are amongst our homeless neighbors. And we can see it's not affecting all of our demographics equally. And I think this goes into more time than we have today, but really has this overlay with the conversation we're having in the community about larger structural issues around racism and discrimination. That's something that we who are running this work are trying to figure out how we can best take a bite out of this issue as well. And so, I threw a lot of numbers at you too, but it's also important to remember the people we're serving. And, this is one slide that again, my colleague puts presentation in here, put in. I think it's great to just remember, we're talking about families. We're talking about people who could be our sisters, our mothers, our brothers, our cousins, neighbors, and it's important as we're thinking about it here from those of us who are in this work about how we can do our best to meet their needs. And so we're addressing the impacts on the community and above all else, the people who are really suffering on our streets. So the other question I get a lot about is why is there so much homelessness in our community? I could spend 2 hours on this, I'm not going to, but it's a really important question because you talk about those 10,000 people on the streets and it's a huge number. And I think one of the natural things we often hear is nothing's being done about it, right? We're just sitting in our hands and nothing's happening. And I understand that impulse on it because the problem seems so big and we're not seeing the visible difference. But what we've seen, and as I've come into this work on multiple sides, is there's a lot being done. But the problem is that it's not meeting the scale of the crisis. So these are some stats that our county helped track, and it really looks at the 5-year period before those last census count numbers I showed you on it. And what was shocking to me when I first came to just realize is we are helping a lot of people experiencing homeless get into housing. And we'll talk a little bit about the different ways we're doing it, but as you can see, thousands of people every year. If you add that all up, it comes out to about 14,000 people. But the reason we kept saying why these numbers have only gone up or at least held steady in the last couple of years is because there are more people we see coming to us for assistance who have fallen into homelessness for the first time. And this stat was staggering. It was right when I started this job. Is for every family we get to housing, 2 to 3 more are coming to us because they've fallen into homelessness for the first time, have nowhere else to go. And it really is that dichotomy of it, of why we're having such a hard time getting our grips around the crisis. We're doing a lot of great things to get people into housing, but the problem keeps growing deeper. And so it begs the question of why. What is it that keeps pushing people into homelessness? And, we have dug a lot into the research a lot more because it is a complex question. I'm not going to tell you there's one answer, but a lot of the research and data has really started to point into some big systemic forces that are why there's so many homeless people in our community. And again, this is where there's a lot of nuance, right? Any individual person may have 10 different reasons why they're experiencing homelessness. But if you look at Santa Clara County, San Francisco, other communities, a lot of researchers are starting to point to these broader causes of why we see it so much more in some areas and then not. And particularly on the left, which I want to talk a minute about to show you some of the data that we've seen, is this combination of how income inequality and lack of affordable housing really are driving the crisis. And so one stat that we use a lot too, which we think is really emblematic, is the fact that there is just not enough affordability in our community. We know this is driven by income inequality, a lack of housing supply, a lot of different factors, but we all know it because we see the average rent, right? The average rent is way high, but we also haven't kept up on building the type of subsidized affordable housing that can be available for people who really need it. And so what has mean is that we have a lot of huge affordability crisis, but the crisis is a lot deeper for the people who are at the lowest end of the income scale. You see some terms on here that will probably mean nothing to you, but really if you look at this, the first bar, 0 to extremely low income threshold, extremely low income households are defined as people who make less than 30% of the area median income. So really kind of the lowest rung on our economic ladder. That comes out to about 41, actually I think it's higher now, 45, $47,000 a year for a family of 4, under 40 if you're talking about a single person household. But for those people, there are just not enough affordable places to live, right? For every 100 of those households, only 32. And so there's a shortfall as you look up of these other parts of the income ladder, but it's even most severe for those lowest income people. And these are the people that unfortunately we see coming into our homelessness prevention system needing assistance, because if you can't have an affordable place to live, you're spending all of, if not all, a lot of your money on rent. 70% of those lowest income households are what we call severely rent burdened, or meaning they spend more than 50% of their income on rent. And that does not leave you a lot of room to breathe. As we all know, again, a lot of other rent burdens, a lot of other affordability issues, but for these folks, that is putting you really on the edge. And what's the last slide with stats I think is really telling for it is kind of putting that in context. What does that really mean? When they took this data, it was probably a couple of years ago, because I don't even know if the average asking rent is still at $2,400 a month. But if you look at that and look at some of these jobs that are in that extremely low income category, look how much rent would eat up of that paycheck, 80, 90%, even in, for medical assistance at the higher end, this lower end scale, maybe 60% of it. That's not accounting for food, not accounting for utilities, not accounting for other basic needs. And, we hear it story after story. These are the families we see falling into homelessness or running into issues when something happens. You lose your job, you have to miss some hours, your car breaks down. And so this is just one of the reasons as we look at the economic factors, a couple of our local data points that really play into what the research is showing, that these affordability issues really have the highest correlation to homelessness. I was recently looking at a study Zillow put out and found out that their research found that communities where there's a high proportion of residents who spend more than a third of their income on rent correlate to homelessness. A new book by data researchers, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, that found that strong correlation. And the thing I think was interesting about it too is the thing I've always been curious about: what happens when you look at that same correlation with issues like levels of mental health or substance abuse, which we often hear as being primary drivers of homelessness. And what these researchers have found is there's not that same correlation. A lot of communities, rural communities, other places throughout the country where they have those high levels, but you don't see the corresponding increase in homelessness. And so, at Destination, we definitely agree those issues are commingled. We need to figure it out together. But when we think of these root and systemic causes, we see it much more on the economic side. And that's why that's one of the main focuses we have. So I'm going to spend, a few more minutes kind of getting into what I think you want to know is what's being done around homelessness. What are some of the solutions? But since I've been talking for a minute, I'll just pause for a second to see if there are any questions about anything we've talked about now. Pop in the chat to see if there's anything that people wanted me to talk about there. Any initial questions before I keep going? All right. I'll power through this and then really welcome any open things you have. So as Karen mentioned, the thing we want to talk a little bit is our community plan to end homelessness. And really, when this came together to create this, a coalition of partners loosely known as the Santa Clara Continuum of Care, but includes our local jurisdictions like the city of San Jose, the county of Santa Clara, other nonprofit service providers, neighborhood groups. The people who are coming together and the input said is we have a big crisis and we need a plan that really gets to this and takes a much more comprehensive approach to address all of those issues that we see creating homelessness in our community. And so this plan was really operated around 3 broad strategies that we really think provides that comprehensive approach. The first is talking about addressing the things we were just talking about. We need to address these root causes that are pushing more people, keeping people into homelessness through a series of systems and policy changes that will recreate and hopefully address these structural issues that are driving the crisis. Second, we've seen us our community build a lot of housing programs that have been shown to work. Now let's figure out how we can scale the successful ones to meet the need in our community. And then third, which is something new, but I think is really important, is moving one, strategy 1 and 2 are big things, going to take time. We have an immediate crisis on our streets. So what are some immediate actions we can take to improve the quality of life for people who are living outdoors, as well as all the impacts that happen on neighborhoods, businesses, and the broader community from having such high levels of homelessness? Now, this plan is way too much than I'm going to explain for you too, but I threw some of the sub-strategies or sub-strategies and action or sub-strategies for each of these that I'll put on a link where you can read more about it if you're interested in. But I put these up here because I want to show it really is a comprehensive approach. We really are tackling a lot of different ways to try to get to the crisis. You've heard me already talk about housing affordability, which is a focus the destination home, and I think the primary strategy that we'll need, and that is certainly a focus, but it's not the only one. We're talking about doubling the number of temporary housing options throughout our community, whether that's tiny homes, modular units, the type of safe parking I heard you guys talk about before. We're talking about how we prevent homelessness. How do we start addressing the living wage issues that are keeping people down? How are we going to improve and have a better state-of-the-art housing system? Mental health and substance abuse, again, which we don't see as a cause, but we know is tied to this. How can we start attacking on all of these angles? And if you go into the plan itself, there's a link there that you can see. And again, please feel free to look at it while we're talking or later. But just from that screenshot, you can see for any one of those sub-strategies, we have a number of different actions, and not in this plan, but jurisdictions, the city and others are working on implementation plans to attack pieces of it. But really, we have this broad framework to try to say, if we can start moving on all of these fronts, what can we do? And we think will help really start driving homelessness down in the community and get more people into better situations. But the one strategy I want to talk a little bit more about, because I think it's something that is top of mind and certainly a focus, is this idea of building more affordable housing. Because again, as we heard about the root causes, that can be a huge game changer for how we actually get people stably housed and address one of those root causes. And it's certainly a central part of the plan. But one thing that I did want to take them into, and Karen actually mentioned, I think there is a lot of confusion. What do we mean about affordable housing? Because that term gets thrown around a lot, and unfortunately, it is used in many different ways. And so you may hear it used a lot of different ways, but when you hear people from the government or people in the space, like myself, talking about it, what we're usually talking about is subsidized apartments where the rents are kept at a below market rate, so it is at an affordable level for occupants. And these are things that are usually financed. We hear talk about it being publicly financed, but it's important to know that they're leveraging usually public dollars as well as private capital. People are paying rent in there, and really it's the financing of it so that the rents can be more affordable for people, even if you don't make enough to afford that market rate rent. The other thing that gets confusing is that affordable housing will be defined in a lot of different ways or different descriptors. So if you look at that bottom bullet on the left, usually when you talk about either units in an affordable housing development or a development altogether, if it's homogeneous, usually hear descriptors that either talk about the income level of the people they're trying to serve or the demographics. And the demographics are pretty simple. You've heard things like senior housing, teacher housing. Sometimes we build development specifically for a type of group. And then other times we talk about units, any given unit or a group of units, and there will be affordable, but affordable to whom? Right? We know that someone making $80,000 has a very different circumstance than someone making $30,000. So these terms you see here, acronyms, ELI, VLI, LI, MOD, you saw them in some of the earlier screens. They stand for extremely low income, very low income, and moderate, and it really talks about the level, the income of the households you're trying to serve. And that's important because if you're going to have this housing, you want to make sure the rent you're charging is affordable for that household. So there's all sorts of types of affordable housing, but there are two types that I want to talk about that is really a big part of the community plan. And when you hear us or others talk about it, you'll hear us bring it up because these are the kinds that we're going to need to actually get people out of homelessness or to prevent someone from falling into homelessness. And one is when we're talking about those income levels, it's extremely low income. And for the simple matter of these are the people who fall into homelessness or at risk of it, right? We need more mod units. We need more low-income units. Those people are struggling too, but just the economics of it, they're not likely to end up on the streets if something happens to them. There are probably other options available. But for these people making the least amount, they're really living on the edge. And so we're really focused trying to build more affordable housing that will serve the lowest income and most vulnerable people. The second term that's really important is this term called supportive housing, another one that does not mean a whole lot to a lot of people. But really what it means is we're going to take that deeply affordable unit, usually for an ELI household, but we're going to pair it with services. And we see that's really important, particularly if you have a household that's coming out of homelessness, because after you've lived on the streets, you're dealing with a lot of other issues. we know your lack of a home is the thing that's causing your homelessness or like well defined, but you probably do have other challenges, whether it's finding a job, health issues. And so when we're building these developments, these supportive housing units pair those services so that people are in a better situation to thrive. And that's really in line with the housing first approach, which is the idea if we can get people into housing and pair those services around them, they're going to be a lot better shape to thrive, stay stably housed, get their life back together, and be in a great situation. And so these are just some of the type of services that we often will pair in these supportive housing units. And I think it's really important to do because I think there's been a lot of misinformation recently about housing first. It's been a punching bag for a lot of people. And a lot of times it makes people think when we're saying housing first, it's housing only. That's really not the case. The supportive housing units in particular, and a lot of these ELI units as well, are pairing these services around with them because we know both are there to be successful. And the only difference is saying, let's get people housed first before we figure out how we can get them to utilize services. And it's really because we've seen over the years that it is just so hard when someone is currently homeless to think about how they can find a job or take care of their mental health because they're in survival mode, right? They're trying to think, how am I going to get to that next shelter bed tonight? How am I going to keep myself safe when I'm in this park? And so really the housing first is built in the philosophy. And what we've seen is that it works. You know, we've done a lot of measuring of the county system who's building a lot of these units and in permanent supportive housing, which is a type of housing that goes for the people with disabilities, chronically homeless individuals. 96% of these people are still housed a year later. And the 1 year later is really just kind of a common metric for the housing world. But we had our friends at UCSF do a kind of randomized trial for us. And what they found too is they looked at a longer period, a 4-year period, and people are staying housed, the vast majority of them, much longer. And I think the stat I recall seeing was the average resident who got into housing stayed 93% of that 4-year period. And so really we see it's not only having immediate success to get them to house, but people do stay housed. And just as important for the rest of us too, it's not just benefits that come for the people we're serving, which is really important, but we all know we're seeing the impacts out in the community. And so we also participate in some studies that try to look at what happens for the demand for services once we get people housed. Because what we see is we know there's a lot of demand. If someone's living on the street, they're probably under the emergency room at some time. The police may be called on them. There's, as we've all seen, issues with trash and blight about it. And what we did is on the chart on the left is looking at a cohort of people who got into permanent supportive housing. And you can see all of the number of times that they were utilizing services of some sort. But once we got them into housing, not surprisingly, it skyrocketed down. And certainly because they're in a more safe and stable situation. And with a separate but related study, we looked at this and tried to quantify it. And Housing 1000, some of you may remember, we really focused on getting chronically homeless people off the streets. And for those 1,000 folks, once we got them to housing, that corresponding reduction in services came out to $40,000 a year. And that's significant dollars. And in many ways, depending on how you measure it, can really exceed the cost of getting someone into housing. And so, these are just some of the reasons why we are big bullish the plan and Destination Home on the fact we need to have more of this type of housing. And we're really continuing to push. We're putting our own private dollars towards it, trying to make sure city and county continues to prioritize permanent affordable housing. And there are a lot of different sources that the voters have been very, very generous in supporting. The biggest one dedicated to this is the Measure A housing bond that was passed in 2016. And with that money, we've already seen 41 new affordable housing developments either built, under construction, or in the development pipeline. They're funded and happening. And that'll have about 4,400 new homes. You can see it's throughout the community. They're spread around. We're continuing to look because we think it's important to have affordable housing options throughout in all different neighborhoods. And, the progress is still happening. I think as of right now, we have about 8 or 9 of these developments are already open, about 1,000 units. And if you look at those numbers on the bottom left, you'll see they keep growing. And it, unfortunately, it does take time to build this housing, but it's happening. And now that we have a robust pipeline, we're going to see it keep growing each quarter, really, month after month. We know there's a lot of different stereotypes about what public housing looks like, a gift from how poorly we did it back in the 60s and 70s. But these are real photos of actual developments that we funded with Measure A. The top left one's in Cupertino, top right's a new one that just opened up in the city of Santa Clara. The bottom two are in San Jose, the bottom two are in San Jose. But you can see these are beautifully designed buildings. Quite honestly, I don't think most people know the difference or who's living there when you drive by them. And, we really do have a good set of developers who are really being intentional in how we design these things to have good experiences for the residents and also for neighborhood aesthetics. And of course, the most important thing about it is that people are getting housed. These are two of the residents who moved into the building on the top right, Santa Clara, where the city of Santa Clara, Calabasas Community Apartments that we just opened, where we celebrated the grand opening last month. It's probably been open for a couple of months. And, really interesting stat from those first 8 or 9 developments, about a quarter of the ones that have already been funded, it's already been housed about 1,700 people. And so, we have these goals to get more people into housing, and we're going to see those numbers going if we can keep the will to keep building affordable housing at the pace we need to. And so almost done here, but circling back to that community plan, there are a lot of different strategies, but we've set aggressive metrics and are tracking that because we know we need to be focused on getting a success. And so the first top one in the top left, I think is the most important. How many people are we getting into housing? And we saw 2 of them there, but those are 2 of 6,000 we've got into housing. And we think the pace of that will go up as we have more of these affordable housing developments coming online. 18% of our way to our goal of doubling temporary housing and shelter. A lot thanks to the work of what Matt Mahan and Quevedo are doing and pushing for more interim and modular units, as well as some other communities around us doing that as well. A really renewed focus on making sure we have resources to prevent people from falling into homelessness, because we know there are a lot of families in crisis and we can do it cheaper and with a lot less suffering if we help people on the front end. And then really, hopefully, all of that will contribute to this bottom right one, which is reducing the number of people coming into homelessness in a given year. And we've already kind of hit our goal of getting that down 30%, and now we just need to sustain it. Can we keep it there year over year? Because the one other metric I'm going to show you that's not an official community plan one, but super important, is getting back to that stat I started with before, right? We housed 14,000 people, but we saw 3 times as many people falling into homelessness. And if you look back at that first chart in the 2018, you see that 3-to-1 gap. And I think what we're starting to see because of the work and this long-term work we're doing is we're shrinking it. We're still underwater, and so we're not where we need to be. That's probably why we still see an increase like we saw in San Jose and a more moderate one in the county. But we're starting to see progress because we're slowly getting more people into housing and we're reducing the number of people coming in. But we just have a lot more work to do to actually flip it, because we are talking about a problem that's been decades in the making and we still have a ways to go. But for us, this gives us some hope that we are on the right path if we can continue innovating, doing things more efficiently and better and at the scale we need. And so kind of the closing thought I'll leave on you is thank you, first of all, for listening to our spiel. I hope it was something informative, but we hope you guys will continue to get involved, because there's some big things we need to do to keep up in this progress. And we really need the support of residents to say yes to these things. So the 2 asks are, 1, continue educating yourself. If you go to our website, you'll see a lot more detailed information on some of the things I talked about, as well as links to the city and county. But also keep exploring others. There's a lot of good information out there. And I think, unfortunately, some of it is not necessarily scientifically baked, but look at it and help understand yourself. Ask questions. I'll send you my contact information afterwards. If you have questions, I'm happy to engage in this stuff. But the more we understand about it, it's really easy to get caught in the simple and the quick hits. But the more we understand it, the more we can really fight for solutions. And the second ask is, after you've done that and you hopefully are on board with trying to fight for solutions to this crisis, consider joining our Housing Ready Communities Action Network. That's a network of residents just like you who are concerned about this issue and want to have a role in it, in solving it. And through it, we ask people to do what I'm doing, have more conversations with your family members, your friends, your neighbors, so people are more educated and understand the issue and the complexity we're dealing with. Help us come and bring these type of presentations to other groups you think could benefit from it. And then most importantly, be ready to speak up when these decisions come to the city council. Much like you heard about this interim housing coming forward, a lot of discussions coming down about how we're going to address this crisis. And we need people in there to kind of let our elected officials know that this is important, that we need to keep pushing towards yes. So I'll go ahead and stop there. I talked much longer than I want to, so I apologize and thank you for sticking with me, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have or engage in any dialogue and conversation that's helpful for you all.
Yeah, I see. Thank you, David. I think it's great information. And, you know, my first thought is that when the tentative numbers started coming out, I was actually surprised it wasn't so much higher. So it kind of shows, it doesn't feel like sometimes it doesn't feel like stuff is being done because the numbers, you just see it all over. But if you look at the numbers from 2019 compared to the numbers that, you know, have been released so far, I expected it to be double what it was, which kind of indicates that there was a lot of work done during the pandemic to keep people housed.
Yeah, a lot of us were really fearful of what we were going to see. And the other thing I think is helpful too, is because I think all of us, our eyes are saying it's getting a lot worse. And that, you know, let's not minimize that, because what our eyes say is important. And regardless if it went up a little or not, there are too many people living on our streets. But what we're seeing too is sometimes the visible signs of what we're dealing with don't always line up with the number and scope of suffering out there. And so I think it's a really important point.
So I was going to start with the chat. There's a couple questions in the chat. Barbara asked, where will the funding come from to build more housing, especially for the lowest income levels?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a complicated answer. So let me give it a shot and let me know if this gets to it. So anytime we build any affordable housing, there are like many different sources that the money comes from. It actually is a combination of public and private funding, but a lot of public dollars will go into it because obviously you're trying to keep the rents low. So right now we're leveraging a lot of sources. You heard me talk about the Measure A affordable housing bond that the county passed. The city of San Jose has a number of different sources they pull on: the commercial linkage fee, the Measure E transfer tax that was passed in 2020, I think. And then there's a lot of state funding that goes into it. So for any one of these developments, we're mixing in those public funding. And then also these nonprofit developers are also taking out traditional private loans too, to help fill the gaps. And so it's a really complicated funding formula, but that's kind of how we're using it now. There are also continued talks about what other funding can come from it. So the state in its budget just added more money for tax credits. There's some people at the regional level who are thinking about potentially a regional housing bond measure. There's always calls for the federal government to consider where more funding can come into it. So those are just kind of a slice for how these things get funded, what we have and where else we're looking for. But it is a complicated way to think of how you fund this affordable housing.
Just as a follow-up, I've heard a lot about how there were rules for new developments that had to build affordable housing, but the developers could buy their way out of it, and then the affordable housing never actually got built. Is that a problem that can be solved?
Yeah, that's a personal frustration for a lot of us. So thank you for bringing it up. So in San Jose, there is it's basically called an inclusionary housing ordinance, which basically says if you build new multifamily housing or a lot of different types of housing, you have to set aside some of those units for people with lower incomes, right? Basically make these affordable housing units. The problem is that basically what the courts have said is because of property rights and things like that, you can't have that mandate without giving people an option, an opt-out. And basically the opt-out is you can pay into a fund. And so paying in the fund is good because we have more dollars to build it. It's not the same as getting them built into the market units. So that really is a legal constraint that has forced us from implementing it in the way that I think many of us wish it could be.
But David, the money goes into the pot and it's still used to build affordable housing. So if that money wasn't there, it would further constrain the ability to afford to build affordable housing elsewhere, wouldn't it?
Correct. So the having the money is better than having nothing. I think all of us would rather see them built on site because one, it just gets the units built quicker, right? We don't have to then turn around the money and now fund it and sometimes what all the cost on it. So yes, there's still something good that comes from it, but I think the way that it was intended, for many of us, I think would be a better way if we could get over those legal challenges to how it's implemented.
Right. Okay, and then next question was from Julie. I may have missed this, but if there is there an effort to make sure affordable supportive housing is spread out throughout the city, county, and not concentrated in specific areas?
Yes, yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is yes. I mean, it's happening a lot of different ways. I mean, if you looked at the map we saw on there, we are there are a lot of different areas we are already building them. So at least when you look at the Measure A bucket, which is only one bucket, but the one we're closest to, we're building in 8 different cities. You can see that there are different specs on the different parts of the map, and it's kind of an intentional focus for people who are building it. But also, I know both the city and county are looking at policies that might put a little more specificity on where those go. And I think it's important. I think there's 2 things important. I think it is good to have more affordable housing options all throughout the city, because we know there are people who want to be closer to family, jobs, transit. That means they want to live in different places. But also because I know that there's a perception that we need everyone in, right? We need to find sites in all parts of our city. And the last thing I will leave with you too is I know that sometimes there's a perception, because a lot of these news happen at once, that there's like a huge concentration in a lot of areas. But part of the analysis looking at it too is there's still a lot of neighborhoods, zip codes that do not have enough affordable housing to meet people who are low income in those areas. So yes, we need to do it. There's a better way we can do it. But the truth is we're going to have to keep building a lot more affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods to kind of meet up with the need.
I had a couple questions. There's one more. Sorry, Jeff Wagner's asking. I think Jeff, he asked, do either of the facilities here in South San Jose have any volunteer opportunities? Jeff, the facilities in San Jose, the EIH, they're not run by Destination Home. They're run by Home First. But there are some volunteer opportunities. If you go on Home First website, I think it's homefirst.org. Do you know, David?
Home First, maybe homefirst.scc.org.
I think
if you Google search it, it'll come up.
Yeah. So it's not run by this organization that David works for, although we're all in the same building. I happen to work in the same building with David and Home First.
And I will say, if you're interested, I would definitely pursue those too, because I mean, it's a great way to just engage. People could always use, help with how they run these facilities, and so it's just a great way to get close to the issue if you have an interest.
Yeah, and I'm gonna also pipe in that Greg and I are on the advisory group for the 2 EIH communities, and we will have a meeting next week. So we get quarterly updates on what's going on. And the big problem has been COVID. So they kind of had anticipated a lot more, quote, volunteer opportunities and opportunities for the nearby community to engage with these, the EIH communities. And because of COVID, that just hasn't happened. And, we're hoping that someday we'll be able to do more things, like maybe, Friday night, get-togethers where we can provide a meal, or just different opportunities. But I think right now they're still pretty locked down, and they don't allow a lot of visitors. Yeah. And then I had a question on one of the things that's been frustrating me with the whole situation is the lack of a central. I get calls. I work for an organization called the Health Trust, and we do some housing assistance. And so and I answer the main line. And so I get calls all the time from people that are looking for help. And our housing assistance, what we provide is done through the county queue and maybe some city referrals. It's all referral. I can't just say, oh yeah, call our housing department and get on the list. It doesn't work that way. It's all through the referral system is somewhat centralized, but when you're dealing with these people that are desperate and they're calling you for help, it's very difficult to tell them, well, you can go here for this, you can go there for that, and you can try to get the FISPADAT here, but what's your status? Are you a single male? Or are you a married? It's so decentralized. And I'm just wondering, from your insight and inside perspective, is there any real effort to have this stuff centralized so that people can go to one place to get help and not, it just seems like it'd be a full-time job, really, to get assistants, it would be a full-time job because you just have to go to so many different places.
No, I mean, it's a good point. I think the answer is yes, there's efforts to build it, but it is complicated. I mean, I think the reality is because the volume of people needing assistance, the different number of different programs and the number of different entities we need to run all these programs, it's become more decentralized than we want to. We, the county, and with the help of the city, have tried to start centralizing some of the entry points through a countywide shelter hotline and some other first points, so at least we can send people the first wave where they can kind of have easier referrals. But there's gonna be a lot more work to do to try to get it where it's much more seamless. So you know, short answer is yeah, it's frustrating. We can do better. There's efforts to do on it, but it's going to be a while to get there because it's a complicated issue.
And I'm not sure there's, I don't get the impression, I mean, I did read an article today about a church organization. There's some organization out there that wants to buy a property in San Jose that will be kind of that, but I think it's going to be a small version. It's a small facility. Do you remember, did anybody see that article? I can't remember what the name of the church was. So I was happy to see that, but again, it's almost like a private effort, and I think this needs to be more of a government.
It's a coalition of religious organizations.
Yeah.
Religious organizations, but it is a small facility.
Right.
And they don't have the funding yet. So it's aspirational at this point.
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know how many, what kind of throughput they would be able to have at, in that facility.
Yeah, this seems to be, it should be something led by the county, because the county is really the entity that's in charge of most of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But there's some work going on there for sure. It's difficult. And I'll say the one thing we're doing is there's also a good balance between like centralizing the information in the process, but you still want those touch points in the community, right? Because all of us, it's pretty easy to get on and online or phone, right? But a lot of the people needs that in-person assistance. So it's a very balanced of how do you have everyone on the same page, but have these different, different places that people can have the touch point, or when you get to the specialized, you're getting people to the right information.
It may also be that it may need an example of the benefit of a centralized, or at least a centralized touch point to convince silos that there's a better way to do things.
I mean, yeah, sadly, that is also part of the problem too, right? I mean, you have everyone, they want to kind of control, or in my program, well, I want to be the one to give out that information and not worry about it. So, there is, I think we're a long way from it, but I do see some renewed interest in doing better about it. The shelter hotline I mentioned is like only one piece of it, but I know they're trying to do it with that. And I do think hopefully that can lead to, they could keep building more pieces upon it as they get that done right.
Okay, I see another question from Julie. Specific to our neighborhood, I don't know who could answer this, but is there a short-term effort to reduce the number of homeless people wandering in the neighborhood, especially around the school and the paseos?
Can I answer that real quick, and then somebody
Yes.
else can answer? Maybe David has some other answers. Recently, there was incident in the park where a person was sleeping across the sidewalk, interfering with people walking their dogs or kids or so forth. I have a picture of that incident, and I've sent it to the Parks Department to find out what they can do about these types of things happening in our park. This particular person has been offered help before, but he doesn't accept it. So David, that's one of my questions to you, is when people who don't have a place to live and are offered help and don't accept it, there should be some system that doesn't allow them to continue doing things like sleeping on sidewalks or terrorizing people in the neighborhood. Do you have any comment on that, or maybe Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I do have some thoughts. I think you should definitely ask Matthews. I know Councilmember Mahan's been really vocal on this. I mean, I think it's a hard thing, and so I think two things. I think what we have seen is, there are some people who want absolutely no kind of assistance, and we do need to have to figure out, for that small minority of people, what we deal with it. But a lot of times, there was a stat I showed earlier, right? 89% of people are interested if there was housing. Other people are open to assistance, but a lot of times the type of assistance available doesn't meet their needs. And this took me a long while to get around it too, but we have a lot of great shelter providers, but shelters unfortunately are not safe for everybody. right? I mean, we're seeing a growing number of people who are LGBT or transgender, and traditional shelters aren't safe there. People who, to accept a certain place of where there's something available, they maybe have to split up with their spouse. So some really hard choices we have to make, right? Or these people have to make. And so that's the thing that we at Shoma are really trying to focus on, increasing those opportunities, because when we have more of those opportunities, I think you'll see the number of times someone declines that assistance go down. And then we really do think that there are a lot of really important reasons that you wouldn't want to force someone into some of those situations. The second thing I'll say too is I know that some of the behavior, so people have nowhere to go, that makes it hard, but I do think, whether someone's homeless or not, when there is really that terrorizing behavior, when there's criminal activity, things about it, that's where we do need, whether it be police officers, community service officers, to be engaged on it. And so I think, it is easy to talk and try to start to generalize that it's always people experiencing homelessness are causing issues, but regardless if it's someone on there causing issues, those are the ones that I think if we have a more robust response from a public safety perspective, that's important, but we need to activate.
It's not the 11% you're talking about. It's even a small portion of the 11% that cause the big problems in neighborhoods. It's the onesies and twosies that come around. And I've also, Julie, been in contact with the police department on our park area. So I'll be talking to you further about that, and also working further with the Parks Department to what to do. One of the questions that was asked of me is, what time of day does this type of thing happen? Nobody's supposed to be in the park after 30 minutes after sunset. That's a general rule that a lot of people don't follow. But sleeping in the park is not something that should be done either. So it's a matter of getting appropriate person out there to address the situation at the exact right time that it's happening, and it's not easy to do.
Yeah, putting my own city head onto, I'll say, not to say this is a good reason, but I know there are resource constraints. So I do think, as we think about, as the cities think about it, I think they need to hear from people like you and what the experiences are, so you can think of how you can have a more robust response. And just, kind of last thing I'll say is, because we are talking about that small percentage, there are some proposals of the state. You've probably heard Governor Newsom wants to do some things called care courts, where in these smaller circumstances, there is, some more recourse for how you can kind of compel somebody into a different situation. And I think people in the homeless advocacy world have mixed feelings about it. But I think the important thing too is that only works if we also have places for them to go, right? Whether it's, mental health facilities or substance abuse centers, and whether it's mandated or not, we just don't have enough of them. So I think the answer is whether it's resources to have park rangers in the parks or more places to go. That's something we need to keep building on, because beyond that, any type of enforcement or things we're doing, we're back to just moving the problem around. So
yeah,
for whatever that's worth, kind of, there's some thoughts.
There's also the controversial, I know Mayor Liccardo seems to be, I believe, supportive of it. I think the mayor of Sacramento, there was some kind of presentation, right to housing, which is basically something where you do build enough shelter beds to have a place for them to go, and then you use that infrastructure to enforce the no camping laws. And that's another controversial solution that's been floating around. And again, you're going to have mixed feelings among housing advocates for that, but an interesting solution.
I saw another question here just from Peter earlier on. I think we skipped over about rent control in Section 8 and how that fits in here. And definitely those are two things that are part of the community plan. Rent control is not something we really focus a lot in San Jose, because there are already some rent control laws on the book. It's hard to really say if you strengthen them, how much of a difference it will make or not. But I think having some sort of rent control is usually a helpful thing when we're talking about these structural issues. And then Section 8 really is a big help. Right now, the way it happens is Section 8 are given as vouchers, and how can help someone help make a rent. We don't have enough of them. I had another slide I took out because I didn't want to go on forever. Federally, they're only, from the federal government, we're only getting enough vouchers that help about a quarter of the people who are eligible. So, I think we need a lot more of those, but those have been shown to really be a huge deal breaker in having people find places they can afford to live. And so we do hope finding ways to expand that will be something that we can all realize in the years ahead.
Isn't part of the problem, David, that even if you have the voucher, there's not enough people willing to rent to Section 8?
It has been an issue. I will say it's not everybody. There are a lot of people who will rent on it, and there's a lot of education efforts going on about the benefits if you're a landlord to accepting it. I'll also say that cities like San Jose and others have passed anti-discrimination laws that don't let you explicitly refuse a tenant for that reason. And so there are a lot of different ways that I think of how it actually plays out. Is not just as simple as that, but even with some of those challenges around it, we've seen them be very effective tools.
David, this is Greg. One of your slides showed that approximately 60% of the people who end up without a house are people that have had some sort of problem in their family, divorce, or et cetera, that line that showed 60%. Well, that's probably always been the case for years. So why has the population of people on the streets gone up when that has always been roughly the same, probably? Or what is it, because of the housing affordability? And
I believe so. I mean, I think a lot of these, we look at the data and those stats, they move around a lot, but are pretty strong, right? Have been pretty consistent. So I believe it was 60% if you combine divorce, eviction, and lost job. And so I think, divorce rates are up, but I don't think that's been a huge one. But we have seen a lot more evictions and economic displacement. So I think that, combined with the fact that the rents are up, which just makes that margin that much tighter. Of all the evidence I've seen, that's the one that seems to be the most closely correlated to why we've seen the growth in the past couple of years and why we experience this when maybe other communities don't at the same level.
Piggybacking on that, the Benioff study that I think you referenced earlier, I think it was that, well, maybe it wasn't that study, but in that presentation that you guys did recently, which I'll plug in a bit, there was indication that there's areas of the country which have much higher, let's say, drug addiction problems, but they don't have the same level of homelessness. And so why? There's more drug addicts there, but there's less homelessness. And the studies indicate that it's just purely that there's not the affordability problem is the major thing that's keeping people from staying housed.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That's how we see it. And I think that's what the research points to. And it's a hard thing because, again, there's absolutely some interplay between mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness, right? We see it, the data shows it, but it just doesn't seem like that is the big driver of why we have on it. And I think it's a couple of reasons. One is, as we've talked to a lot more people, and there's some new data we think will coming out, is a lot of times mental health, substance abuse is the result of being homeless, right? It's not what caused you there, but after you're living on the street for 3 years, you're going to be a little messed up, right? But the other thing too is that it's, there are a lot of levels of mental health and substance abuse in our community. But if you have financial resources, if you can afford a home, it's back to the housing. That's the part that is really causing it, even though all these other issues can play a role in it.
Question from Greg here. Where does Senate Bill 9 come into play here in Senate Bill 10, if anything, to increase affordable housing? And how do you see that working?
Yeah, I think, full disclosure, I'm a fan of SB 9, but I don't think it has huge implications for addressing homelessness. I think what it may mean is that we see a little bit more units coming on, a little more light density, but I don't think that's going to have a huge impact on rents that affect the macro change. And then again, as we looked about the type of affordable housing we need for people experiencing homelessness, I don't think we're going to get it from that, right? If you add a duplex on it, unless someone decides they're going to rent it out for a really cheap rate, it's probably not going to be the type of housing that really helps us deal with homelessness. So You know, as an organization, we're part of Housing Circles. We think it's probably a good step in the right direction for broader issues, but it's not we don't see it as a game changer when it comes to homelessness.
Thank you.
I'm gonna also give a plug to a really fantastic panel that Destination Home participated in recently. It literally was the best panel on homelessness I've seen in a long time. So I put it on a link. It was, I think, hosted by San Jose Spotlight, and there were a few other participants, including, what was the lady's name that did the Benioff study?
Dr. Margot Cushel.
Yeah, fantastic. I would recommend it to anybody that's interested in this topic. It really was fantastic.
Yeah, and particularly if you're interested in kind of the data behind the systemic causes and what is really correlated to homelessness or not. They did a really good job. Some dynamic speakers. Dr. Margot Cushel's done a bazillion years of research on this issue. The head of the federal U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. So, you know, look at that. If you go to our website, there's more information about this we have a section called Understanding Homelessness. There's links to the community plan. So, you know, again, if this stuff is interesting to you and you want to get in the weeds, please take a look. And Karen, if you send everyone my email address and phone number, if there's questions you have afterwards, I'm happy to talk more about it too, because, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at this thing.
Well, thank you very, very much, David.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And hopefully it was something that was helpful for you all, and look forward to seeing and hopefully talking to many of you guys soon.
Yes, I believe we'll be in contact with you again. Thank you. Very
Thank you
informative.
so much. It was great. Great
Thank you,
information.
Yeah. Nice seeing everybody. Have a great rest of your meeting.
Do we have anything else, Karen?
I don't think so. Thanks for everybody for attending. I hope you got some good information.
Thank you very much, Matt, for being here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Matt, very good information from your District 10 office. We appreciate that.
Thank you all. And great presentation by David, I thought.
Yeah, it's very informative. I wish more people would have joined, but what do you do, you know?
We'll push out a recording and see if we can get more people to have seen it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, everybody. I guess we'll adjourn.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Have a
all.
good night.
Good night.
Hope to see some of you at the barbecue next week.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, thank you.
Good seeing you, Greg.
Good seeing you too.
Okay.
Hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah, maybe at the barbecue if we can make it.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks much, you guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye now.